Thank you, Bacher. Let us continue in the vein of compassion as we welcome our next guest. She has entitled her talk today, Muslims and Gays, Boy, We Hate Your Ways. Lay is a queer Muslim youth displaced from Bosnia at the hands of genocidal nationalism. She is currently living in Detroit. While she is not a scholar, she is happy to be here today to share her experiences with all of us. Lay is an advocate and supports grassroots organization. She is particularly passionate about destroying heteropatriarchal capitalist white supremacy. Other interests include tapping into her radical Yugoslavian peasantry roots, laying outside, the power of memory, and its role in remaining connected to a lineage of liberatory resistance, basketball-playing-lesbian aesthetics, making academic thought accessible to the masses, and of course, hip-hop. Please welcome Lay. Is this good? Oh.
I don't have a traditional presentation, nor do I have a traditional identity, lifestyle, anything, so we're going to go with that theme. My presentation is called Muslims and Gays, Boy, We Hate Your Ways, which is like a tip lyric, but we'll get into that. So what does my queer Muslim sense of self do besides scare the shit out of my mom? It does a lot of things. I don't know where to begin, which is probably why it took me so long to write this talk, why it took me so long to even start writing it. And I use the term talk generously. This is just stream of consciousness mostly. I'm not partially queer or partially Muslim. These aren't facets of my identity that I can separate. And I'm not queer plus Muslim. It's not additive either. I'm all of these things all together, all at once, all of the time. But we do have to start somewhere. So let's start with the homo stuff. What does my gayness do? And I'll answer this and every other question in terms that make sense for me. Anything else would be dishonest. So the social significance of homosexuality, or what it does, is it forms an identity outside of the conventional gender order. So in terms that make more sense, this means gayness is a threat to the gender hierarchy. In terms that make the most sense, what gayness does is scream fuck patriarchy at the end of the day, a system of male domination that pervades the society we live in, one that touts itself as progressive because it is Western, Western because it is progressive. This gendered order embodies sexuality within it. Scholar Catherine McKinnon goes so far as to say that women and men are divided by gender by the very social requirements of heterosexuality, which institutionalizes male sexual dominance and female sexual submission, sexuality ultimately being the linchpin of gender inequality. Gender isn't the only oppressive hierarchy potentially threatened by queerness, and I say potentially because it is possible for us to reproduce oppressive relational dynamics within non-hetero partnerships as well. The male-dominated gender system, its microcosm being the nuclear family, is inherently intertwined with capitalism too. Within families, men systematically exploit and benefit from women's labor within a domestic mode of production. Of course, gender is also racialized, access to power, and certain notions of womanhood are reserved for white women only. So in the end, there are many things that determine what it means to be a man or a woman, sexuality included, and there's no other options in between or outside of that binary. And queerness threatens to set fire to all of them, like the worst things ever made, ever. The stigmatization of homosexuality used to maintain a gender disorder that we can't separate from race, class, and other systems of oppression didn't just fall from the sky. If it did, we could just chuck it back up there and be free. Maria Lugones writes about modernity and the colonial gender system that was implemented in its establishment. She talks about colonialism and the role of the gendered system in disintegrating communal relations, egalitarian relations, ritual thinking, collective decision-making, collective authority, collective economy in indigenous communities on Turtle Island, occupied land on which we currently stand. I don't know where to begin with all that colonialism does either, again, hella things, but one is the imposition of entirely new and violent ways of being and knowing, including knowing your gender and knowing your sexuality. Gwen Benawe, a two-spirit trans poet, says, "My gender and body are not just identity or performance, but sovereign embodiments of a worldview rooted in spirit." She asks, what does it mean to interpret my gender outside of the sovereign worldview of Anishinaabe nationhood? As an Anishinaabe transsexual, my gender is spiritual and imbued on me from birth by creation. In this piece that I'm referencing, Banawe goes on to argue the limitations of queerness. She doesn't feel a need to differentiate queerness from her Anishinaabe body. But still, reading narratives like hers, reading analyses like Catherine McKinnon's, reading queer zines, queer theories, anything else queer that I could get my hands on a few years ago, was really instrumental for me in challenging the stability of my straightness. And it solidified for me that there is no solid way of being, that there is more than one way of being. And ultimately, this shattered heteronormativity's rule over my psyche. But regardless of my ethnic displacement, I still speak as a settler on this land with no authority or ability to lay claim to Anishinaabe ways of knowing, so I speak to my own experience. One of growing up a Bosnian Muslim refugee, and how my relationship to Islam was informed by queerness, how my relationship to queerness is informed by Islam, how this continues with no end in sight. The Islam that I've been bestowed with has always been really strange. Profound, yet patriarchal by some, homophobic by others, a million more things. Of course, Islam is not a monolith. Scholar Omid Safi writes that Islam teaches us nothing. The Prophet does, interpretive communities do. Just as I've always refused the notion that my queerness can be confined or reduced to an essence or a gene in my DNA, I reject such narrow understanding of Islam. And I was able to connect certain sexist visions of it, like my dad's, to his patriarchal power pursuits, to his PTSD, and again, a million more things. With everything, I've always chosen to be an active participant in fleshing out, navigating, and determining who I am and who I choose to be. And I base this firm assertion in my sovereign capacity to be anything but firm in how I am me on the following question: who is going to tell me otherwise? This question is applicable to other queer Muslims with routes different than my own. My mom would always say there are many routes to God as there are people. For those queer Muslims whose understanding of sexuality is that they were born this way, those who turn to progressive Islamic interpretations to resolve an externally imposed upon conflict of how one could possibly be a queer Muslim, who's going to tell them otherwise? The question stands for those queer Muslims who've never felt there was a contradiction to resolve in the first place, those who didn't need to read the likes of Dr. Kugel or Murray and Roscoe to realize that there is room in Islam for queerness. And for those who did read them, there was plenty of literature to find, there still is. Evidence of homoerotic sentiment in Muslim societies may not look Western, like, quote, a single pattern of homosexuality defined by institutions and discourses closely linked to the modern nation state, but it is there. Its inconsistency, its variety, its distribution, its longevity are all there. We can and should discuss this. We should also discuss how punishing queer Muslim communities for not fulfilling Eurocentric internationalized models of LGBTQ, predicated on certain lifestyles, capitalist consumption, coming out, and many a rainbow, all works to construct a monolithic civilizational discourse, according to Esak, where the West conception of sexual diversity is privileged as the only moral and civilized one. This is a transhistorical feat steeped in Orientalist logics. The erasure of historical Muslim homoerotic sensibilities is integral in this mission, and it supports the construction of an eternally homophobic Muslim society positioned in direct opposition to an eternally queer-friendly, modern, and democratic West. The positioning of the West as modern and democratic or violence-free is laughable at best. We shouldn't look to the existence of Black trans women in the States only when discussing the hate crimes and murder rates they face, thereby strictly imagining them in death and not in life. But the rates are harrowing, and much like gay Muslims, the rates are real and they're there. But it isn't only queer folks domestically who suffer from facades of Western exceptionalism with respect to gender and sexual diversity. Jasbir Pawar writes about the human rights industrial complex and imperialism in the name of gender equality, with continued NATO presence in Afghanistan being just one example. Gura Reshepi writes about Orientalist representations of the Balkans, positioned as pre-modern on the virtue of religion and a socialist past, and how queer identities in the Balkans are depoliticized, and these people are depicted as vulnerable victims of this past. So Islam becomes a boogeyman in his analysis that Kosovo has to denounce to be liberated or to join Europe, as liberation is perceived as Europeanization, whiteness. The Islamophobia this heightens has proven to be lethal. Such an LGBT rights-based imposition only ends up taking political agency away from queer Muslims in the Balkans and serving the West, in this case the EU, in its unlimited expansion and its self-referential mission to save itself from its homophobic past, so it can maintain this image of a multicultural, tolerant, and secular Europe. What does secular even mean? What does a real secularness look like? Tolerance look like? What if we try for pluralist instead of multicultural? My queer Muslim identity scares my mom. It also scares the powers that be, like those of the EU, because it threatens the very logics that their neo-colonial missions need to function. It also threatens the logics of Muslim societies that justify their queer phobia as resistance to neo-colonialism, reinforcing the notion of non-hetero sensibilities as nothing more than a Western import or a corruption. Nikita Dewan unabashedly states that these supposedly conflicting ideologies of heteronormative nationalism on both sides of the post-colonial divide in fact end up collaborating with each other. We have much to discuss, and we have much to preserve: our histories, our present-day communications of sexuality that don't fit the dominant hetero-homosexual identity, and we have much to destroy, mostly binaries. Every day we continue to reject at least one of them, the impossibility of being a queer Muslim. Thank you for listening. I'm definitely actually the most unqualified person to be here, but I do believe that we all hold wisdoms within us, and we all are worthy of being here and speaking and sharing those. So thank you.